South Carolina, for example, by October of 2007, organizers had held some 400 House meetings. You know, House meetings where you get your friends together, like Tupperware kind of thing, and then the organizer goes, and then each one of them, you get them to have a meeting and so forth. 400 House meetings attended by some 4,000 people, which became the foundation for a mobilization that would deploy 15,000 Election Day volunteers in South Carolina, most of them active for the very first time. And you see, one of the powers of that relational organizing is if you're an insurgent candidate, like Barack Obama certainly was, it enables you to go outside the established institutions of power and create your own. It allows you to build from the bottom up with new leadership, with new practices, and new kinds of commitment. Third, an organizational structure based on leadership teams rather than solely on individual leadership. Now, that's very controversial. But you know, think about it for a moment. Think about your experience with volunteer work. Think about your experience in volunteer groups. Think about how many disintegrate because of the failure to develop reliable, consistent, and creative leadership. How many turns into somebody who says, I want to be leader because I'm an alpha and I can tell everybody what else to do. And pretty soon everybody else is gone. And then they complain about how, gee, nobody wants to help. Well, why don't they? You won't let them help. You know what I'm talking about, no? Does it sound familiar at all? You know, or you have the other, so that's, or you have the other one where we don't believe in leadership here, okay? So we don't believe in decisions, we don't believe in authority. And then what you get is what feminist scholar Joe Freeman called the tyranny of structurelessness. You still have power, but it's being used off the table rather than on the table, and it's being used in ways that's not visible and that you can't hold people accountable for. So what we tried to find was a way to create leadership structure that could be accountable and responsible and collaborative, but not fall into one end or the other. And one reason, frankly, so many campaigns turn to so-called paid volunteers, that's an interesting notion, and paid phone bankers and paid canvassers was because of the unreliability of volunteer structure. Well, what we introduced to the campaign was a way of creating an interdependent leadership structure, a way in which people join on a leadership team with very clear roles, very clear norms, and the success of each one is dependent on the success of the other. It's like a basketball team. It's not a team where if you screw up, that's great because I'm going to look good. It's the opposite. You build it where you need each other. Now, that leadership team structure, we launched in 2 weekends in California. We launched over 200 teams built that way. And that organization, California, with 4 organizers, eventually it had 14 organizers supporting it, was able to generate over 200,000 phone calls a day into other parts of the country, and it blew the campaign away to see volunteer effort so powerful, so well organized. And in Pennsylvania, 100,000 new voters registered through volunteer leadership teams. And of course, that's why in the general election there were thousands of teams all over the place. So the third thing, the third piece, is about being very intentional and purposeful about how you structure your leadership effort so that the work really can get done. Fourth, although based on broad values, effective organizing campaigns learn to focus on a few strategic objectives. Now, that's, of course, true. It was with the farm workers. It was true of the grape boycott. It was focused on grapes. And, of course, it's true if you're trying to elect a president. National organizing campaigns usually locate strategy, responsibility at the top or the center. But if they can chunk out responsibilities for objectives in time and space, then real local responsibility can be assumed for achieving those objectives. And the autonomy to strategize how to accomplish objectives is what engages, motivates, and empowers local teams. Participation in a national campaign can benefit local efforts enormously. It creates opportunities for learning, for getting coaching, for gaining strategic leverage, for supporting the crunch. And national campaigns benefit enormously from campaigns owned at the bottom, access to local knowledge, greater motivation, better quality work, and greater capacity for strategic adaptation. The trick is finding the balance between the two, without trying to micromanage over here and without sort of, I'm just going to go do my own thing over here. And we were able to strike that balance in this campaign. It's extraordinary. But if that balance hadn't, and the power of that was, it meant that everybody was strategizing. You know, because I don't think of strategy as being like you have a plan and then you implement it. I don't know, how many times has that ever happened to you when you did a strategic plan? The real art of strategy is how you adapt what you've planned to the new conditions, to what you're learning, to the new challenges. It is an ongoing process of learning and adaptation. Now, if the only place that can happen is in one room somewhere, the whole organization is frozen. On the other hand, if strategic capacity is created from all the way down and up, the organization is agile, it's able to move, it's able to adapt, and it's able to deal. So again, it's not a question of ideology, it's a question of what works. Finally, organizing outcomes were clear, measurable, and specific. You know, as you know, the outcome to an election is decided by counting votes, or in the case of a nomination, delegates. It's no different than the principle of assessing the outcome of a union organizing drive, a campaign for legislative reform. The challenge is to determine the metrics of what it is to count. Now, see, I was taught that in organizing, when I was trained in the farm workers, that if you couldn't count it, it didn't happen. The question was, what were you counting? And how did that relate to what you were trying to do? And in the campaign, a big issue was, do we count voters identified or do we count volunteers recruited? See, different agenda, different agenda. I was so happy that in the general election in the summer, for 6 weeks, the metrics, all of the national campaign focused on volunteers recruited, house meetings, people showing up, capacity building, so that then the power had been built to accomplish the voter identification and all the rest that had to be done, that if that's all we had been counting, we never would have built the capacity to do it. Does that make sense? You see what I mean? And it's sort of... Now, one more thing I want to say just about that is that when we first formed these teams, there was a decision about sharing information. And the campaign decided to share this voter file with everybody. That was a big deal because it was like, voter file, got to keep it secret. All the committees had access, which meant that the work they could do, they could draw on the best information that we had. It also meant that the campaign could see what was going on everywhere. And it's a wonderful example of the way the internet, new media, can introduce transparency that can help you see what you're doing, learn from what you're doing, and share what you're doing in far more effective ways than we had ever dreamed possible in the past. So I just want to put that together with the solid committee building work.